Hey everybody, welcome back to some more Showdown in the Badlands star reveals. Up today we have the priests, the rogues, and the shamans. First though, priests. So priests got a lot of support for multiple different archetypes. One of the big ones was this kind of weird bottle priest type archetype where you generated these one-cost bottles and Pip the Potent would, copy them so you get even more value from them, and your Thirsty Drifter would get cheaper and cheaper as he drinks from these delicious bottles of goodness. Do I think Bottle Priest is going to be a thing? No. So one star to Invasive Shadeleaf, one star to Swarm of Lightbugs, and one star to the Thirsty Drifter. I think there's better single target removal in Priest at 4 mana than the Invasive Shadeleaf. And that's kind of what I see it as, because it is 8 damage to a single minion. The excess is probably going to be super irrelevant, so I think that is going to be probably the weakest of all the cards. Swarm of Lightbugs is interesting, but Priest doesn't really have anything it can do with a big board full of tokens, so maybe watch this space. If Token Priest somehow becomes a thing, then Swarm of Lightbugs will see play in that deck, but without that support, it won't see any play. Thirsty Drifter, I think, is pretty close to potentially being able to see some play in the Highlander decks. But I don't think it'll quite cut the mustard. You really want to run a lot of one-cost spells, which kind of suggests you're going to be more... one-cost cards, which kind of suggests you might be a little bit more aggro, and I just don't think Thirsty Drifter, with no tribe, will see any play in those aggro priest decks, which are typically Unholy and Undead. Unholy? Undead, and like Shadow, I guess. Yeah, that's kind of Unholy, right? The other two, though, I think we'll see play in other archetypes. Holy Springwater, I'm giving 3 stars to. I think this will see some play in Overheal Priest. Now, I did play an Overheal Priest deck maybe like 3 or 4 months back. And I mentioned then that I thought we were getting close to this critical mass, that the Overheal Priest deck might work. It's going to be an aggressive deck, and it can do some really disgusting things early on. It is susceptible, though, if you get board cleared by some sort of early board clearer, card like the... I don't know, the Mage... Creation, the Inquisitive Creation card, you kind of struggle to rebuild your board again after that. It's not like the Totem Shamans and the Undead Priests, which can kind of recreate a board again pretty quickly afterwards, and you have to multiply remove the board. I don't think Overheal quite has that yet, so I think it's going to sit in the tier 3 state, and therefore I think Holy Springwater will make that deck and will be a 3-star card. Pip, on the other hand, I've actually given 4 stars to, and you might be surprised by this. I think Pip might actually see some play in the Shadow Priest deck. Shadow Priest runs a lot of one-cost undead cards, a lot of one-cost shadow cards, and maybe, just maybe, for that extra little bit of oomph, the little bit of extra value you might need to get over the top of someone, just throwing Pip in there at your 4-drop might be good enough, right? Also, I think it will work with your... Is it called, Raise the Bones or something like that? The draw spell, which gets discounted to 1. At the very least, if you bounce. If you copy that card and get another, 1-cost draw, that's pretty good for an aggro deck, right? You want to play your cards out as quickly as possible. And I think Pip is just going to help you, give you that little bit of extra value you might need. So I think you'll see some play in there and might actually make an addition to that deck. So it's going to be somewhere between 2 and 4 stars. It's either going to see play in that deck and then get dropped, or it's going to see some play and get kept, in which case the Undead Shadow Priest is currently set as a tier 2 deck, so I think it'll be around the tier 2 area. Then we have the Thief Priest package. They never learn. Thief Priest doesn't work right now, and these cards don't make it work either. Tram Heist is just an awful card, full stop. Copy cards that your opponent played last turn. That doesn't work with your Thief Priest cards, which want to steal the cards that you've copied from your opponent. That won't work with Tram Heist. And Tram Heist, to at least break even, you kind of want to copy 4 cards from your opponent. So it's 4 mana, draw 4 cards that aren't in your deck and don't synergize with it. So this just won't work. So 1 star. Similarly, Posse Possession, A random minion in your opponent's hand could be great, could be a Titan, could be, I don't know, Armor Vendor. 4 mana, 4/4 Armor Vendor, obviously pretty bad. Other thing that I will just mention is a lot of the really good cards in Hearthstone, classically, and even, now, have battle cries on them. So, Posse Possession, you won't get the battle cry, therefore it's just an understated 4-cost minion, right? So, 1 star. Benevolent Banker, I kind of misread this. By the way, I'm giving it 2 stars. I misread this at the time of the reveal. I thought it was discover a copy of a spell from your deck, but it's not a copy. You actually get the spell, which means if you meet the quick draw criteria, you steal a spell from your opponent's deck. So there is a world, and I think this is why I've given it 2 stars, where you'll tech this card maybe into an ETC or something if you're a control deck, that if you go up against a combo deck that relies on one key spell, you will ETC, Benevolent Bank will be in your ETC, you'll get it out of ETC, it'll get added to your hand this turn, so the quick draw effect will be active, and you'll try and discover this card. So it's kind of like a 7 mana, steal a spell from your opponent's deck. I think that might work. So it really depends how you value a card that gets put into the ETC sack, being a part of the deck. Either way, I think this is going to go into Control Priest. Control Priest is set in tier 3. I don't think this set is going to elevate into tier 2. So I think I'm pretty safe putting it as a 2-star card. It may be 3-star though, and see a lot of play teched into Control Priest. We then have Injured Hauler, which you might not be surprised by. I'm giving this 3 stars. I think this will go into the Overheal package. Good for clearing your opponent's board. So if you go into a matchup of aggro minion decks versus aggro minion decks, you'll have that slight little cutting edge that you'll have this Injured Hauler destroying your opponent's board. And it's going to be really hard for other decks to remove, because assuming you play this and heal it immediately, a 3 mana 3/7, that is awfully hard to deal with. So, yeah, I think it could be a thing. The only slight downside is that it does 4 damage to itself, which makes the Overheal a little bit harder to activate than I think some of the other ones. Like the Location, which heals 3 for all, won't get this in 1, but I still think there are ways to get your 4 health, so you'll definitely run that card in that deck. It'll slot into that deck, but it'll be a tier 3 deck. I don't think it's as good, for example, as the Shadow Undead Priest. I think that is more consistent than the Overheal deck, and therefore will be at like a higher tier still. The final card is Elite Badlands Savior. This is your Highlander reward for Priest. It's definitely going to go into some sort of control-orientated deck, where you want to get a slow build-up of value. Typically right now, the Control Priests run Amenthal, the Titan. They run the Colossi as well. And they're pretty good things to get 4/4 copies of. So as a result, I think there will be a Highlander Control Priest deck. My worry is, though, how do you win the game as this deck? Do you just try and outlast your opponent? And I think that's kind of the key of this deck. It's just going to be trying to outlast the opponent, but you can't outlast Mage, and you can't outlast Warrior. So I think it's going to slot into where Control Priest is now. Control Priest is in tier 3, so I think it's going to be a 3-star card. This is despite the fact that Reno's obviously boosted this deck. Reno will go into this Highlander Control Priest deck. They just need something like Odin. It's not like I'm saying they should print this card right now, but I think for a control deck to work, it has to have some win condition other than just like outlasting your opponent. I think the big win condition for this deck will be to throw a ton of undead cards in it, like Thaddeus and Katrina Muerte, that's what she's called? I always forget her name, sorry. The one that resurrects undead. And maybe you can just have this big swing turn, this big turn of value your opponent can't respond to. Unfortunately, Reno exists, so I think a lot of decks will have an answer to that turn, so I think it's going to stay in tier 3 land. And now we come to the Rouges. Let me evaluate these together. Rouge really got kind of like the same package. So they have an Excavate package, they have a play card from other class, Burgle, Contraband, Stash type of package. So let's evaluate these two together, because you're trying to generate cards. The Drilly the Kid excavation train leads you to eventually get the, I can't remember what it's called now, the Azerite, is it Scorpion for Rogue? I don't remember, whatever it is. It gives you a card that if you excavate 4 times, you get 4 random spells. If you do it 8 times, they cost 0. Do I think this is going to work? Do I think the payoff with Velorock for playing other cards from other classes, a 3 mana 3/6 charge that lets you discover random cards? Do I think this whole package will come together and work? No. I think it's going to be awful. I think it's all 1 star. I don't even think this is going to be like a tier 4 deck even. That's being a bit harsh. But honestly, it's kind of my belief. I played a lot of Contraband Stash Rogue back in the past. Contraband Stash isn't in standard right now, so the only way to get value for playing all these random cards is Tess and Velorock. I think Velorock is not a big enough payoff to basically put bad cards in your deck, so to speak, and then rely on finding good random cards. If you can get the payoff of Tess, you obviously want to be bouncing her back to get the insane value for playing all these cards you generated from other classes. Unfortunately, you kind of want for your treasure to bounce Drilly the Kid back, so like there's a little bit of competing anti-synergy there. So I just don't think it's going to work. I think it needs one other big payoff for playing these cards from other classes that it just isn't there with Velorot plus Tess. It kind of needs like a non-legendary card almost, so that you can have more chance of finding it. I will admit, Drilly the Kid may see play elsewhere. It's a pretty big value card. It's almost like 4 mana, 4/3. Draw 2 cards. And it has got the mech tag on it, and mechs, you know, are loved by rogues right now. But I don't think this will see play in mech rogue either. I think it's going to be too slow for that deck, which is very aggressive. Maybe it sees some play in like Secret Rogue, but I'm still not convinced by it. Similar with Stick Up, I think that might see some play in Secret Rogue because a lot of the quick draw cards are fast answers, I suppose. They're more control orientated. And Rogue does sometimes struggle to, you know, catch up. So maybe you'll put Stick Up in to catch up to your opponent, but I'm not convinced. It's definitely not something you're first picking into your deck. Antique Flinger is a good payoff for these excavations, but as I said, I just don't think the package will work together, so it's 1 star. And Bloodrock Coat Shovel is just an actually atrocious card. So, yeah, I just don't think juice is worth the squeeze, sadly. Then we have 3 other cards, which you could argue go into this Burgle package as well. It's kind of like your coin Wishing Well Rogue Generation deck. Every time you play a coin, while you have Wishing Well in the field, you get a 1-cost legendary from another class. Now that is a really good payoff. It's better than a random spell. Very rarely is a randomly generated legendary from a class bad. It's at the very least statted pretty well, so you're going to get pretty good value for this coin. Therefore, I think this deck will actually see some attempts to play, but I don't think it's going to be good. I think all these cards are going to be 2 stars. There's not enough coin generators right now for your Wishing Well, and I think that's going to be the big thing that hurts it. And similarly, you're probably going to want to play Tess and bounce Tess back multiple times to get all these legendary minions, but I think it's just going to be too hard for that deck to set up to that board state to get insane value, right? Value Rogue, lol, it never works, right? And I don't think it's going to work now. Also, Dart Throw, I think, is a pretty bad spell, but because the Wishing Well is so insane, I think people will try to make it work. So I did give it 2 stars. Bounty Wrangler, actually, I nearly gave 3 stars to, because I think this is, of all the rogue cards we've seen in this set, I think this is the one card that might actually just see play in decks. It's very efficient. If you draw this on turn 3 and play it on turn 3, you can kind of treat it as almost a 2-mana 3/4, because you get the coin for later. Combo Rogue deck isn't particularly strong right now, but the coins are always useful for the combos. The combo deck will run a lot of cheap cards anyway, and it's always nice just to have this coin, as I said, to activate your combo for free, right? Because most of the spells you're going to be running in Rogue are going to be 1 or 0 cost. Sometimes you're going to have that annoying turn where it's like, I'm 1 mana short. I just wish I had a coin. I think Bounty Wrangler can just slot into that archetype. Plus, they might honestly just see play in Secret Rogue. It's just a good, solid... It's a good little... Is it a goblin? A good little goblin fella, right? Good, honest goblin. And then finally, 777s. Deal 7 damage to a minion, draw 7 cards. 1 star. Very quick, right? I think Rogue doesn't need to be able to draw 7 cards. You might say Miracle Rogue can play all these cards, and then you play 777s to refill your hand, and you generate these giant graveyard minions, the ghosts. I forgot what they're even called now. I think it's a pipe dream. It's too expensive to 7 mana turn. You lose too much tempo for it. And I just don't think there's going to be a payoff good enough for you to play those 7 cards on the next turn again. Miracle Rogue has kind of fallen off drastically. And I don't think 777 is going to help it. And then if you're going towards this Contraband deck, even if this does work, you won't put 777s in that deck because the deck struggles to empty its hand from my experience. And you definitely don't want a card in your hand that draws 7 cards. You just won't ever be able to play it. So you want to run it in an aggro deck, but again, by turn 7, if you haven't won as an aggro deck, you're probably going to lose, right? And especially since you're going to take turn 7 off to draw 7 more cards to, reset your aggression, it just won't work. So sadly, 7 mana, draw 7 cards, deal 7 damage, not good enough. And the card probably won't be able to be buffed because it has to have that 777 stat line, so womp womp. Finally, for this episode, we get to Shaman. And I couldn't contain my excitement when the Shaman cards were revealed, because so far there are very few decks I think are just going to, or at least archetypes are going to get sprung from this set. You could argue, I guess, that Highlander will be the big one. I think Highlander will be the main stay that comes from this set. But it will be other decks that we've already had that will like morph into these Highlander decks. So I wanted a bit of more variety. And Elemental Shaman promises that variety. We're pretty close with the Elemental decks already. The neutrals have also got a lot of good Elementals in it. And I like the idea of this tempo-y mid-range Elemental deck. And I think Shaman can pull this off. Sadly, I don't think it's going to pull it off in such a way that it'll be a tier 1 deck. I think it's going to slot into tier 2. And even then, that might be a little bit of copium there. Reno has really hurt me. As soon as I saw Reno, I was like, oh, god damn it, this Shaman deck is not going to be happy with this. Yeah, I think control combo decks are king right now. I think these mid-rangey, tempo-y decks are going to struggle to survive. And that's kind of where we're at the moment. But I think if any of them are going to survive, I think the Shaman deck and the Singleton Paladin deck might also be able to generate enough value to live through all of this shenanigans. The big payoff, obviously, for this deck is to play an Elemental every single turn, and then eventually play Scar the Catastrophe. I think there is a within reason situation to have Scar the Catastrophe looking at it doing like maybe 10 damage, which is very close to the Mage Legendary from about a year ago, whose name's just escaped me right now. Oh god, it was a Moarg, right? It was the one where you did 10 damage with your button, and you did 10 damage to all minions into the opponent's face. I think this is where I'm looking at that archetype fitting in. You just play all these value cards your opponent has to deal with, and you keep plinking away your opponent with these minions. And eventually your big finisher, after they get into their power play in the control land of 8 mana plus, you just drop Scar onto the board and finish them off from there. I think it's going to be tier 2 though. I think all of these cards will see play in that Elemental Mage deck. And yeah, I think it's going to be... I think it's going to be solid at the very least. I should also mention, I think Trusty Companion, I very nearly gave this 5 stars, because I think this might see play in other decks. I can see a world where Totem Shaman might consider running this with some of the tweaks to the Totem deck that I might play this as a little surprise deck on the launch. But the other archetype that I wasn't sure at the time would work was Murloc Shaman with Cactus Cutters, because Cactus Cutter is a really efficient card. Battlecry, draw a spell if you cast it this turn, get +1/+2 and Taunt. That's a 2 mana 3/4 with Taunt that draws you a spell, but you have to be able to play the spell. Now, Shaman has a lot of cheap spells. Like, Trusty Companion might be the most expensive spell you would run in this Murloc Shaman deck. They have some 0-cost spells. They have a lot of 1-cost spells. Your little box of fish. And I can definitely see those cards making their way into this Murloc Shaman deck. And when I evaluated it, I came to the conclusion I think Murloc Shaman will be a thing. I think it's going to be tier 3. I think it's going to come slightly under this deck. I don't think it's going to be quite consistent enough for some of the other aggressive decks out there. Again, going back to, your Undead Shadow Priest, I think that will overwhelm this one, but you will have some disgusting turns where you, like on turn 4, you Cactus Cutter, get a Trusty Companion, you play the Trusty Companion on your Cactus Cutter, and effectively, that is a 4-mana combo that has given you 5-7 worth of stats with Taunt, and drawn you a minion, which will be a Murloc, which Murloc synergizes with more Murlocs. That's disgusting. That truly is disgusting. But I think a lot of decks will be able to deal with this, so I'm going to put it in the tier 3 region. But watch this space on Murlocs. It might come as a surprise that the Murlocs, they might rise again, even with just Cactus Cutter. Maybe that plus Trusty Companion are good enough alone to see Murloc Shaman become a thing again. The final package, I think, is more for this Highlander Dr. Holiday package that I think is going to be more of a control deck. Dr. Holiday equips you with a Staff of 9 Frogs that attacks eventually 9 times over 9 turns and generates a 1/1 frog with Taunt that, becomes a 2/2, then a 3/3 as time goes on. I think this deck won't work. I think of all the Highlander decks that have like a Highlander support, I think this is the weakest one. I think Dr. Holiday has one major weakness, and that is Rustwrought Viper. People are still running Rustwrought Viper. It's not rotated out yet. And if this deck was ever very good, people would just run Rustwrought Viper as a 2. And Dr. Holiday then is a 5-mana 4/5. Swings for, I think it's 2 damage, right? It's like a 2/9 weapon. Generates a 1/1 taunt. Big whoop to make you a singleton deck. The juice is not worth the squeeze. So I'm giving Dehydrate, Amphibious Elixir, and Dr. Holiday 1 star. I don't even think Reno will save this deck. I think there are just better control decks out there with better win cons. The one exception of this Giant Tumbleweed, I've given 2 stars to instead. I don't think this will work, but I think it'll see play in a Evolved Controlled Shaman list, where you at least have a win condition of generating a giant evolved board. The Giant Tumbleweed is very good for clearing the board and then being evolved by the Muck Pools, because the 6/6 is going to be an understated 6-drop. You can just evolve into a 7-drop and feel pretty happy about things. Sadly, I think again you're going to come up against Reno decks or better control decks, and they're just going to laugh at your board state, and it just won't be a thing, right? Control Shaman, it's not a thing right now. I don't think the Giant Tumbleweed will make it a thing. And that's kind of also how I've treated the Highlander package as well. If you think of any deck that you would be willing to put Renathal into and go to 40 cards, I think that's a good idea where Reno would then also fit into your deck. And I think Shaman just doesn't have the set right now to justify running Renathal to make it a control deck, which kind of makes me think there's not 10 further good enough cards that would see play in a competitive deck, therefore Dr. Holiday won't work. Anyway, next time we have the final starter ratings, and it's going to be the biggest episode yet, because we have Warlock, Warrior, and the neutrals. And there are some spicy cards in the neutrals, let me tell you that. So I look forward to going through them at a later date. If you've enjoyed this, why not leave a like and subscribe? Everything helps me out. I'll see you again next time. Goodbye.